Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Kuzma and Brian E. Roach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and I am joined today by my co-pilot, the Chewbacca to my Han Solo, Mr. Brian E. Roach. What's up, Chewie? It wasn't too bad. I can't do it at all. I won't attempt. That's why I'm Han, and I'm cooler too. You know, actually, you know, in reality, I'm the tall one of the two of us. I'd probably be Chewie. I'm like the freakish. Oh, I'd be Groot. I'd be all those guys.
But I'm the old one, and Chewie's like 190 years old.
Yeah, well, that does make sense. There was something like that. I'm trying to remember. I don't know if that was the trailer for this newest movie, or it was something I was rewatching, and it was like a translation from him. You're how old?
Yeah. I think it was the new movie trailer.
I think so too. It's just stuck in my head, and of course, it's just releasing now, so I haven't had the chance to go and see it yet. But I will. I'm a big movie, summer movie blockbuster type guy. I don't go see everything. There are some movies that I will avoid like the plague. We were talking about this offline. It's like I'll wait. I have so many streaming services now. I mean, I have Netflix. I've always had Netflix. I think I pay for Netflix and I barely use it. I don't even Netflix and chill anymore. Because you got Amazon Prime that comes with all the things. I got to ship stuff because I don't take my kid to the store. Then she wants things, you know what I mean? HBO. I have all these things, and I sometimes I just wait because it's just more convenient to watch at home, and I don't have to deal with some teenager with their phone or anything like that. So, but I still go out and catch all the big movies. I know you're a pretty big movie guy too.
Yeah, I used to run, back in the day, as they say, I ran video stores. I had a video store chain that I was responsible for. So for people who don't know what that is, VHS tapes, ask your grandparents about VHS tapes. People used to come in and rent them, and they would pay money to keep them, and then we'd charge them $40 in late fees.
Yeah, that's great. I know, I can relate to that, even though we joke about how old you are. That was my job. I was a senior in high school. I worked for about 4 years through college, Hollywood Video, now defunct, and I was actually there when there were still VHS tapes, and those suckers were heavy to carry around, and sometimes it's the only way you can get some of these NFL highlights is to get it on VHS. They keep everything under such lock and key. I still have like a Steelers Super Bowl VHS tape sitting around somewhere. I don't even think I have a VCR to play it on. but you know what? This will warm your cockles. Please be kind. Rewind.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, you should have fined people for not rewinding the tapes. I mean, geez, we had like 4 of those suckers going all at once. The stuff would just pile up. So when DVD came around, I was there when DVD first came out, and as such, I had one of the first DVD players, and it loaded like really just slow. It was like on slot speed, but it was cool because nobody else had a DVD player, and I could rent all of these movies and it was like, the sound and it was still a tube TV, so the video quality was better, but how much better? Well, at least it didn't have like the spots where, the tape was chewed up and it would be like, and do something like that. So it was better, and you didn't have to rewind it. That was cool. So
yeah, dude, I have had every format in existence, starting with Betamax. I had laser discs, hundreds of laser discs.
Wow. I can't say. I've seen Laserdisc players. I have no experience with them. I know that like something like, the original Jurassic Park, when it dropped on Laserdisc, was like 6 of those little discs or something in order to play the entire movie or something crazy. And it had like the old CD carousel tray that you could load multiple ones on because like VHS, you couldn't fit an entire movie like a DVD or now a Blu-ray on one disc. You had to have multiple tapes to watch Braveheart, for example, or Titanic, or one of those movies. Those were the ones that were always bad to like put back, especially. It was like, oh man, it's like it takes up like twice as much space on the shelf. And we're getting off track, but it does correlate today to today's topic, because we mentioned something on, I think it was last week's show, and we were like, you know what, at some point that could be a topic all itself and we should talk about it. And that's how the Steelers utilize their outside linebackers in their current defense, but more specifically how those linebackers, specifically Bud Dupree and TJ Watt, compare with other players around the league as well. And the answers here might surprise you. I had this very convoluted table we were trying to figure out. Like, I pulled up the stats and I was still like, I got to make sure this is okay so I don't give people false information. So we have some, ground rules here. But I think the first set of ground rules is this is something that you've said, and this is something I'm repeating. Just like, you can't expect the Steelers outside linebackers to be your Betamax, your VHS, even your DVDs, and maybe even the Blu-rays. These guys are out in the digital now. It's a completely different ball game. It works a completely different way, and you just can't have – you're not going to have the Joey Porters and James Harrisons and Jason Gildens and Lamar Woodleys and Kevin Greens and Greg Lloyds going out there and tattooing quarterbacks 10-plus times in a season. They're just not utilized that way anymore.
Yeah, and there's a variety of things to look at here with this. It's not there tends to be some rose-colored glasses when we look back on what we expected or what we thought the production of these linebackers was. Certainly you cannot always compare a James Harrison to everybody else, because not everybody is what James Harrison was. You can't say everybody's going to be Joey Porter or Lamar Woodley. But everybody seems to think these guys were double-digit sack players every year. That's not necessarily the case. It'll be interesting as we go through this when we look at how they actually compare to the guys that we have now.
Oh, I know. I'm so excited. I just want to say it now, but we'll wrap up with it because I think it'll blow some people's minds. I love the fact that you just brought that up, by the way. And I have that. I started work on the article version of this as well. And we were talking, the first one we were talking about was, what was it? Jarvis Jones never had more than two. Yeah, he never had more than 2 sacks in a season, and he played 50 games. He had 35 starts, which was crazy. And we were talking about how Bud Dupree had 8.5 sacks in 23 games with 9 starts, and Bud had 4.5 the 1 year, I think, where he just came back. And there was still a rotation, too. So Bud Dupree, this is another thing you have to understand. Last season was the first year that Bud Dupree played as a full-time starter. Now, he didn't even play all 16 games. He did miss week 1, and there was still a little bit of, let's pull these guys off the field, which is kind of surprising in a way. In fact, I'll mention it right now. We were going through the snap counts, and not just Dupree, but TJ Watt as well. Week 15, week 16. Now, week 16, that's a wash. I think that was the Houston Texans. I think that was a little bit different of reasoning. But these guys, you're looking at like between 50, 60 plays. If you get above 60 plays, there's a problem in a football game. But that's about the average offense or defense, how many snaps there are to go around. And I think Bud was sub 40, and I think TJ was 40 right on the dot against the New England Patriots. Now, why would that be? We're talking about, well, these guys drop into coverage a lot more than maybe what James Harrison used to. And if you've listened to our show for, the last half year to maybe even for last season, and when Harrison wasn't playing and we were trying to describe to everybody why he wasn't playing, is because he was older and didn't have the same type of skill set. Maybe he would have if he was younger, but there was obviously a regression where he was a liability and couldn't be out there in a potential passing situation, or where they wanted these guys to drop into a zone, or you have something like crazy. You do have a little bit of man coverage, but it's mostly always zone with the outside linebackers. They're not going to, unless you have TJ on like Jordy Nelson, but that was still just dropping into a soft zone behind the line.
Yeah.
But yeah, Harrison was just, he wasn't really, I don't know. I don't want to dog him at all. And when you talk about double-digit sack seasons, coming back to that's the thing I said I like that you brought up. There wasn't a whole lot of that. you had like that spell where I think we got really spoiled the Super Bowl seasons like 05, 08, and even 2010, where you had the big snack in the middle. He was the Pro Bowl nose tackle. That is like an obsolete, that's a dinosaur now. That's the VHS tape of the NFL defenses. Now, it may be on a 4-3, but in a 3-4, they're using a base 3-4 with the three guys on the line maybe about 1/3, maybe less than 1/3 of the time anymore. And that's been true of several seasons because the NFL has become a pass-happy league. But it's important to point out that Greg Lloyd, widely considered one of the greatest outside linebackers in Steelers history, only had one 10-sack season. He never had double digits ever again. And Joey Porter, he had his best season with the Dolphins, believe it or not. I think he had 17 and a half sacks, but he only had double digits twice while he was with the Steelers, and that was 10 and a half. So he only had 10 and a half. We're not talking 12, 13, 14 sack type players. That was in 2000 and 2005. Harrison and Woodley actually did it twice, though.
Yeah, and you know, you were talking. I'm glad you brought up Casey, the big snack, but let's not forget Aaron Smith and Brett Kiesel as well in that mix. But we had a different schema, a different group of guys with different levels of talent. You know, Aaron Smith, Kiesel, and Casey would all eat blocks. And they would free things up for these guys. And in that span of time from 2008 to 2010, where both Woodley and Harrison were getting double-digit sack numbers, remember the strength of that defense. This is that defense that was on the front of ESPN and Sports Illustrated and was a dominant unit. But you have Palomalu in there. You had Potsy, James Ferrier in there.
Taylor.
Ike Taylor as a shutdown corner, even if he couldn't catch the ball.
Ryan Clark.
Yeah, Ryan Clark, the heat-seeking missile himself. This is a defense that it was almost generational in its makeup. So, to try and say, well, these guys should be that, you need to get the rest of the pieces around them, and you need to be playing it in the exact same way, which just doesn't happen. We don't play that base unit nearly as much. We don't have a Casey Hampton to sit there in the middle and eat up 2 to 3 guys, and we're not asking Cam Hayward and Stephon Tuitt to curb their game in order to just eat blocks. So, it's a different style of defense, and that is going to impact how the outside linebackers play. But as you said, this idea that Steelers linebackers have always gotten these double-digit sacks is almost a myth. Yes, we had a dominant run from 2008, 2010, where we had, I think, at least one of the two, Woodley or Harrison, was getting doubles, if not both, was getting over 10 sacks. But they didn't do it every year. And, as when the drop-off came, especially for, guys like James Harrison and Woodley, when the drop-off started, remember the last time James Harrison had double-digit sacks was 2010. He got close in 11, got 9, and then from 2012 on, the highest he ever had was 6. I understand he played less games, he played less snaps over that time, but that is because one of the things he could no longer do well was coverage, because it's always been a part of their game. It's just more so now.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Even going back to, you go to like the Bill Cowher type of eras, and I'm going to pull up Kevin Green is just like a freak nature example, but that's exactly it. And when it comes to the generational thing, the Baltimore Ravens aren't the same type of defense anymore that they used to be. You could argue all you want. You could say, well, you know what? Why don't we play like that? You know what I mean? And you look and see some of the numbers. They were good against the run at times, and they were absolutely terrible at times too. They gave up 166 rushing yards on defense to the Jaguars, who dropped 44 points on them over in the UK. They came back and played the Steelers a week later, and we dropped 173 rushing yards on them, 26 points. They were a little bit better against the Raiders. The Bears ran. They lost to the Bears in overtime. Does that sound familiar by any chance? 231 rushing yards. That's what their defense gave up against the Chicago Bears. So the Steelers aren't all alone. They aren't playing like, oh, these poor teams and not doing – the Vikings, they lose to the Vikings 169 yards. Okay, and then the Dolphins didn't do anything. The Titans didn't do anything. The Packers, the Texans, the Lions, those weren't like strong run games. Maybe the Titans. But, I mean, you see the parallels here with the Steelers. Now, the Steelers couldn't really run or do much. They didn't run. I should say that's the opposite. They didn't run on them in December when they had the rematch at Heinz Field, 59 yards rushing. That's because they threw, Roethlisberger threw for 486 yards. So their defense on the back end was also giving up stuff too. So they had their liabilities. The Bengals ran for 146 yards on them. They lost to the Bengals at the end of the season for yet another year. It's like 3 straight that they totally coughed up, that destroyed. They didn't make the playoffs. They ended up 9-7, didn't make the postseason. I couldn't imagine if that happened here in Pittsburgh. They would have had Mike Tomlin locked away somewhere already. Half the city would have been burned down. It would have smelled like burnt ketchup at Heinz Field. I mean, it's just, this is the same type of thing. And now I understand we tend to think the Steelers have better talent. You have Ben Roethlisberger. We don't want to waste Ben Roethlisberger. You have the killer bees, so to speak, Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown and everything like that. But that defense from the more modern Super Bowl era, you have a Hall of Famer in Troy Polamalu, future Hall of Famer. You had guys that were perennial Pro Bowlers. I mean, James Ferrier could have probably been a Pro Bowl player if he wasn't overshadowed by guys like Hampton and also, Kiesel didn't even get in that much. I mean, maybe one Pro Bowl nod, maybe 2 in his whole career.
Aaron Smith only got 1 too.
Yeah.
It's because they didn't get the statistics.
Exactly, and they didn't get the statistics because all the glory went to the guys like Woodley and James Harrison, and Joey Porter and guys like that through past seasons and whatnot. So, I don't want to belabor this too much because we have some actual statistics to pull up, but I'm getting Kevin Green here. And Kevin Green had 3 phenomenal years in a black and gold jersey. It's amazing that we kind of like take ownership of him, which maybe isn't fair. Maybe it's just because the Rams are the Rams and they're kind of still lost in the whole thing because he played 8 years with the Rams. He only played 3 here. He played 2 with Carolina, went to San Francisco, killed it in San Francisco too, and then came back to Carolina and then retired at age 38 in 1999. This guy is probably the worst example to say because he still had 1 season where he didn't have double-digit sacks. He had 9 his last year in Pittsburgh in 95, 12.5 and 14. This is what you try and think of, but you got to think, man, Kevin Green is a Hall of Famer. What, like 3rd or 4th all-time sacks? It's crazy to think just how many he's piled up in his career. 160 sacks is what I have here. Just phenomenal player. But if you go back and you grab a guy like Greg Lloyd, what's the sack? What does Harrison have for the sack lead for the Steelers? 80? Is the number
80 and a half. 80 and a half.
80 and a half, and he beat Jason Gilden, who had 79 or 79 and a half or something like that, 78. He beat him by 2 or less for that record. And Porter is just a little bit down that list. I think he has 70-ish. You know what? These guys are not racking up that many sacks to begin with either. I mean, they're not Bruce Smith. They're not like Reggie White type guys or Lawrence Taylors or things of that nature. It just has never really worked that way. That's a big number just for the Steelers franchise.
Yeah, it really is. And I think when you try and take it in perspective, we have this expectation of Blitzburg, we have this expectation of Sack City and whatnot, Thunder and Lightning and all the different names that they've given. But, usually what happens is you have a period of time where we have a tandem of people who meld together, and it's a short time frame, 2-3 years, and we build up to that. We could be headed in that direction again. It could be, who knows? Maybe TJ Watt's going to get 10 sacks next year. Maybe Bud Dupree is going to get 10 sacks next year. And at the same time, still do it in a different scheme where, they simply are feeding off that. It's unlikely. And the reason is because Cam Hayward and Stephon Tuitt are rushing the passer instead of eating blocks. So it's not just, we're going to tie up everybody and let you guys run at the quarterback. You got 5 guys running at the quarterback instead of just essentially the outside guys. It's possible that these guys will get into or close to that range, but I think for their careers, it's very, very reasonable to expect them to be high quality, even Pro Bowl level players, and still be in between the 7, 8, 9 sack per year range.
Another thing I don't think that gets considered is, and Watt and Dupree move around a little bit, but they're pretty much locked down to strong side and weak side, and how often one is on a strong side versus the weak side. And Bud is probably, I don't know, he may have to face the tight end more as an extra blocker more often than Watt. I don't want to say that without looking at film, but it will be interesting. It's the same thing I said about I'm going to go back and check out a few of these other games too. But yeah, you got Greg Lloyd, for example, and Greg Lloyd, let's see here, 7 sacks in 89, 4.5, 8, 6.5, 6, 10, 6.5, 1. That was the season he only played 1 game. So that's the bulk of his career there. I didn't count 88 his rookie year. He had 4 starts. He played 9 games, had a half sack. 96 he played 1 game, 1 sack. And then 12 games in 97, 3.5, age 32. And then he found 1 year with the Panthers and only had 1 sack with them. So, I mean, no one ever disregards Greg Lloyd as being one of the all-time greats when it comes to the Steelers' defenses. When you go and you look at Bud Dupree here, Bud Dupree, 5 games started his rookie season, appeared in 6, 4 sacks. Okay? That is an outside linebacker rotation. It was near 50-50, but Bud got a slow start. I don't have all the snap counts in front of me, but he got a slow start to that season. Now, he got a slow start in 2016, too, because he had, the groin injury.
Yeah, the groin injury, or the abdominal, some injury.
Abdominal, something that was, something that put him on injured reserve. And he didn't come back till, like, week 11 or something like that. He appears in 7 games. He starts in 4 of them. That's when they got rid of the rotation, and it was just him and James Harrison wrecking havoc on everyone. 4.5 sacks. And then last year he has 6, and all of a sudden everybody's like, well, I don't know. That's not quite enough. This guy, he's a bust. He's a first-round bust. He's not doing anything. Well, TJ only had 7. He had 1 more. TJ had 39 tackles, which is just, I think, 6 more. Let's see, 31, 8 more tackles than Dupree. Dupree had 9 that were assisted. He recovered a fumble. Of course, he didn't have interceptions. He had, but geez, I think if Kaiser threw that past me, or you could have caught that one in the week 1. 13 assisted tackles. So I don't know how much of this is weak versus strong side as well, but they're near identical players. I mean, 6'4", 252, TJ Watt. You go and you look at Bud Dupree, 6'4", 269. You look at their measurables and stuff. They're both freak athletes. They are very gifted players. And that's where we're here to tell you about how they're actually used, because for all of this, all we throw out is statistics about stats and stuff. And sometimes people say, let's throw statistics out. That doesn't tell the whole story. Well, we have some statistics that actually do tell quite the story. What I pulled up is, let's see. Now I'm trying to find it again, Brian. It always happens to me. It's loading up. I took the top 25. This is going to sound a little confusing, and it's hard to visualize unless you're actually looking at it like I am. But I wanted to see all of the sack leaders in the NFL. Who are the guys getting all the sacks? Because this is a thing that's important to everyone who criticizes Dupree and his production. So I wanted to take these guys, but not all guys who sacked the quarterback are created equal. And especially so when you're asking players like Bud Dupree and TJ Watt to drop into coverage. Well, what do you mean drop into coverage? How often do you have these type of things? Well, it just so happens that I have compiled a list, and I was using some information from Pro Football Reference, my favorite place to go get this stuff. I'm on the site right now, actually. Pro Football Focus. And I know Pro Football Focus, a lot of people make fun of the voodoo witchcraft of which they come by grades. I'm not using their grades. They go through and they analyze. They have their own kind of special stats, and they analyze every snap. So what I could do is I could put the two tables together, and I could find out not only how many snaps a particular player played last season, but how many of those were passing down snaps, how many of those were a run play snap, and then of that, how many of those was this player asked to drop into coverage? Well, you need to have a little bit of more criteria to this, because I think I had like 100 and some names, and there are guys that are going to be you're going to come to me and say, well, why isn't Calais Campbell on this list, or Dante Fowler, or Chandler Jones? Well, there's a very simple reason. Like Calais Campbell is only asked to drop into coverage 0.8%, not even a full 1% of the time. And quite frankly, most of the guys who fell off this list were 3% or below, but I wanted to keep at least to a 5% or higher rate of dropping into coverage, which more or less meant these guys were being used in a similar fashion maybe to TJ or Bud. Because don't forget, a Calais Campbell or some of these guys play in a 4-3, and they're a 4-3 defensive end versus a 3-4 outside linebacker. There is a difference to their skill set and their job, what's required or asked of them. The other thing is, and we laughed about this because I said this off the air, as much as I like to try and tell everyone on this show that Andrew Jones is the GOAT, I feel like I have to say that like on every show. It's important. It's very important to me. But I can't back up whether or not he has a 101 QB rating when he plays the Cleveland Browns in a meaningless game in Week 17. It really doesn't matter, because he throws 40 passes for the entire season. You can't say he's like the 8th ranked quarterback in the NFL for the 2017 season based on that. No, you need a certain baseline of criteria. You would say passes attempted, right? Well, in the same regard here, I said these guys have to play at least 400 snaps, which I think is pretty fair, because like I said earlier, there's 16 games. If you have if a baseline of 50 per game, that's like 800 snaps. So I'm saying that they're probably playing at least half a season or better in this scenario. So now that I'm so long-winded with all of this, drop into coverage at least 5% or better of a baseline of 400 or more snaps. And I came up with the top 25 players based on that table. And the statistics are really telling. Brian, I need to take a breath. Go ahead, buddy.
All right. Yeah, it's important to remember. Look, it's interesting that these guys are edge guys that do drop into coverage, not necessarily traditional outside linebackers, and outside linebackers who drop into coverage. You're not going to have guys who would have been like the L.C. Greenwoods and Dwight Whites of former Steelers years, because those are pure defensive ends. You're not going to have Cam Haywards and Stephon Tuitt's in this list. Even though that the sack numbers are high, that's not their job. So I think you've put together a reasonable list, and I think the most telling statistic I'm going to leave for you. But everybody seems to want to downgrade, especially Bud. They love to get after Bud. And I get that part of that has to do with the fact that Bud still over pursues on plays. A lot of his sacks come from digging as opposed to true breakaway. But again, it's amazing to see how comparable his statistics are to guys that we consider to be elite level at that position. So an example might be Justin Houston, who was the darling of the NFL a few years ago, right?
Yeah.
He played a huge number of snaps for the Chiefs last year, 1,015, I think is what you have on here, and went into coverage 145 times. That's a lot of snaps, a lot of coverage. It's about 14% of the time, and he had 9.5 sacks. When you compare that to Bud, who played considerably less snaps at 150, but dropped into coverage almost as much, 137 times, a higher percentage, 16.2, and had his 6 sacks. Those numbers aren't that far apart. It's not, you're talking about a guy who people think of as an elite pass rusher at 9.5 sacks and the type of play he did. And then you look at Bud's statistics. It's not that different, especially when you take into account the higher percentage of dropbacks and the lower amount of snaps that he actually played. It's comparable.
Yeah, of the players in this top 25, I may have to include this graphic with the podcast. Just I know some people on iTunes won't be able to see it. Maybe I'll have a link or something for it. But Dupree played the fifth most total snaps, 8th most coverage snaps, and was still in the top 10 for the sacks. Now, TJ was 8th overall. He played less snaps, but he was in coverage 4th most. So even more than Dupree was, and he was 7th in sacks with that one extra. Here are the names from the top for the sack leader. I'll name all the names here, so you can get a baseline of who's on this chart, since we could see it and you can't. Justin Houston was number 2 on this chart, okay? Ryan Kerrigan from the Redskins, number 1. Houston, 2. Matthew Judon from the Baltimore Ravens is 3. Bruce Irvin, 4. Derek, now with the Raiders, formerly Seahawks. Derek Morgan, Tennessee, 5. Clay Matthews, Packers, 6th. TJ Watt, 7th. Brian Arakpo, 8th. Trey Flowers with the Patriots, 9th. And Dupree is 10th. Then you start getting down into the Bears, Leonard Floyd, the Rams, Connor Barwin, Falcons, Vic Beasley, Giants, Devin Kennard, Eric Walden with the Titans, Shaq Barrett, Lorenzo Alexander, John Simon, Sam Acho, Jordan Jenkins, Kyler Fackrell, Barkevius Mingo, believe it or not, with the Colts. Mm-hmm. And that's actually a very interesting one that I'm going to bring up too. Josh Martin, Frank Zombo, and Kareem Martin. So some of those may not be all household names. Well, that's because most of the guys after Dupree and even Leonard Floyd had 5.5, Connor Barwin had 5, and Beasley had 5. Everyone else had 4 or less sacks. The reason these guys all make the chart is because they're in that 400 snaps minimum total played and dropping into coverage at least 5% of the time. Well, Ryan Kerrigan had 13 sacks. He's the top of the list. He's the only guy with double digits, which is pretty amazing there. But he only dropped in just less than 6% of the time. 5.98% is he asked to cover. Well, how often is Bud Dupree asked to cover? 16%, a little over 16%, 16.12 to be exact, over 10% more often than Ryan Kerrigan. And when you take a look, now Dupree played 30 more snaps than Kerrigan did this year, but Kerrigan's only dropping into coverage 49% of the time, and he faced 438 passing situations. Dupree only faced 372 passing situations and dropped into coverage 137 times. You know what I mean? The opportunity to sack the quarterback isn't there. But you know what this opportunity, and put it with TJ, 809 total snaps, 316 passing, 183 coverage snaps. He drops into coverage 22.6% of the time. Just a quarter, over a quarter of every play that TJ Watt's on the field, he is in pass coverage. It is not your grandfather's Steelers defense.
Nope.
But what this frees up, Brian, is what we were talking about. We talked about how Casey Hampton and Aaron Smith opened up the floodgates for James Harrison, Lamar Woodley. Oh, I missed the Diesel. The Diesel opened up too.
Yep.
But Harrison and Woodley, they had the ability to go in there and do their thing. Guess what Dupree and Watt's roles help do? They help Cam Hayward get double-digit sacks, lead the team in sacks. It helps Mike Hilton get 3 sacks in one game coming from a DB blitz. There are different things going on now because you know what? The reason Dick LeBeau isn't in Pittsburgh anymore is because everyone had it figured out. That wasn't working anymore, and they didn't have the talent. Remember, everyone was calling the Steelers' defense old. and washed up around 2011. I think was still a very good year, minus Tim Tebow. But like 2012, you know what? The wheels, they started coming off of the train there, and these guys don't grow on trees to replace, quite frankly.
Well, and it's the reason that they don't grow on trees is people don't play that kind of offense or that kind of defense at the college levels. So the college levels are not generating Casey Hampton type players. They simply don't come out. They're very rare. And you don't have nobody generated the Aaron Smiths and the Brett Kiesels because you have a different style of defense and a different style of offense played at the college level. So even when they got those guys, that was true for the most part. Casey happened to be a rare occurrence, and they had to find Brett Kiesels and Aaron Smiths and guys that could fit the right kind of mold as to what they wanted to do. And the unselfish nature of that kind of play as well, knowing, Aaron Smith could have conceivably been a fringe Hall of Fame level, defensive tackle. He was that good, but because he was willing to fit the role that existed for him, and play the way he had to play, he didn't get the statistics, and he's never going to get in those conversations. But he was that good of a player. Let me interrupt for 1 second. That not only that, but his career was cut short. But another important thing is how many NFL teams started using a 3-4, saw the success of the Steelers defense and wanted to mimic it, so they made those type of players even less available. Yeah, absolutely. And, it's just not the first thing that we as fans have to accept is it's not the same kind of defense. And as they move, you hear some people saying, oh, well, let's just go to the 4-3 then. Let's just do the complete switch. Well, we don't have those players in place either. And just switching to the 4-3 may not be the best idea. Maybe the best idea is to innovate again. Come up with a new way that, again, surprises NFL offenses, takes them off their guard, makes them think about how to actually combat the defense the way that that Dick LeBeau was able to do early on in the days of his implementation of zone blitz schemes and things. Come up with ways that are going to make the offense blink, because that's how you stop them. You stop them by confusing them, by not giving them what they expect to see, disguising what you're doing. So just saying, let's switch to a 4-3, la-ti-da, like it's the easiest thing in the world. But instead, let's build a defense that is going to be hopefully dominant, but is also going to be a different way, something a little different and more geared to the type of offense that's being played, because there are very few teams that are run heavy anymore, if any. They don't have the run as their primary attack, and that's what's great. A 3-4 defense is going to stop the run more than anything else, but it's not as geared towards the pass. So you have to say, understand that things evolve, and that's what the Steelers defense is. It's an evolving defense, and we kind of touched on that in an earlier podcast when we talked about the fact that they absolutely did address the defense in this draft. I think that when you look at the fact that from outside linebacker statistics and guys who, as you said, drop into coverage a good number, because one of the names that I was the most surprised wasn't on this list, because he's a guy that gets mentioned with outside linebackers as one of the best in the business, is Terrell Suggs. But that gives you the exact idea of what that means. Terrell Suggs isn't on this list because he doesn't drop into coverage very much. He is predominantly a pass rushing specialist. Everybody who talked about Carl Lawson, and you and I talked about this earlier, he did no coverage as far as you could tell, hardly at all. He had no passes defensed in the year last year. He was purely a pass rush specialist. We don't have that guy. We don't have that position. We don't have that need. We need our guys to be multifaceted in the defense that we play. It's a different scheme. It's a different style. And I think once you can accept that, you can look at the way that guys like TJ and Bud play and maybe have a little more understanding that they actually are doing a pretty good job considering what they're being asked to do.
You hit the nail on the head, man. And I did want to bring up, Chandler Jones is probably maybe a little more of an exception, but he's still not dropping into coverage 16% and 22% of the time, or 26% of the time. Chandler Jones had 17 sacks this year with the Cardinals, but he only drops in about 4.9%. That's actually kind of high when you start looking at Calais Campbell, 0.5% with his 14.5 sacks. Everson Griffin with the Vikings, 0.8% for 13 sacks. Joey Bosa, 0.12%. Terrell Suggs, 1.5%. Khalil Mack, a little bit different here, but still 2.7% rounding up. Melvin Ingram, just under 3%. Von Miller, 3.9%. Jadeveon Clowney, 2.3%. And the list goes on and on. In fact, the only one that really drops into coverage and had more sacks than TJ or Bud Dupree was Matthew Judon, and I forgot to pull up his game splits, and there was a reason for that too. Just like people try and say, well, you get the Browns twice a year. Well, you know what? So did the Ravens, and I think that may have had something to do with it too. There are some names. The top 10 at the very least. When it comes to the sacks, I didn't cover all the coverage thing. I said Ryan Kerrigan just had under 6%, and he was the only one with double digits. Justin Houston, with his 9.5, he gets out there about 14% of the time. But like I said, 472 passing downs, 145 coverage snaps. He has literally 100 more opportunities to get to the quarterback than Bud Dupree. He also played 167 more snaps. Dupree didn't play week 1. We saw he was sat, rested, or rotated in December, as well as Watt was. Of course, when they're playing Houston and they're playing the Browns, that's going to happen too. It's crazy to think to me that you have only one guy who had like more sacks. You look at like Bruce Irvin, who drops back a 13.75 and had 8 sacks, and he played roughly the same amount of snaps. You know what I mean? And you're talking about those two players, and I said Steelers Nation would pee themselves if tomorrow they announced they were signing a Justin Houston and Bruce Irvin and adding them to the team, because they quite practically have those prototype and production type of players already on the roster. Whether you want to believe that or not, the proof is in the pudding right here. Clay Matthews, who is 6th in sacks on this list, 7.5, a half sack more than TJ Watt, 1.5 more than Bud Dupree. And guess what? He drops into coverage 6.5% of the times. He still had more passing downs, 356. He had 40 more snaps to get at the quarterback than TJ Watt did. He only dropped back 43 times compared to 183 and 137. You can't even make that comparison. There were guys who wanted Brian Orakpo, who's been hurt so many times and would have been very unreliable. There's Trey Flowers. Oh, the New England Patriots. Oh, you got to go get that guy. Well, Orakpo, 12.5% of the time in coverage. Trey Flowers, 5.5%. You're looking at 7 and 6.5 sacks. They're bookending them. TJ Watt, Dupree, they're right in the middle of that sandwich. I don't understand why we should be upset about either of these two players. I am absolutely thrilled they gave a 5th-year option for Bud Dupree. I think that there's a very high ceiling for him when he gets to play a full season for only the 2nd time in his career coming up here.
Yeah, it'll be. I say this with a small amount of hesitancy, and this is why I say it, is because I agree with you. I think he has a very high ceiling. I think he needs to produce this year at a very high level. What I think is that we have to have the right expectation for what that means. And that expectation is not a guy who is going to necessarily dominate as a pass rusher. It's a guy who's going to fill the role that is needed for this defense to allow it to be the type of defense it can be. And that is a defense where it could lead the league in sacks, as they did last year, but those sacks are going to be in different areas. You're not going – I mean, let's be realistic. There aren't going to be 3 or 4 guys on here with 10.5 sacks or 10 plus sacks. That's not going to happen. So if Cam Hayward's going to get, his 10 plus sacks, maybe somebody else can come close, but it's going to be divided out amongst the rest of that group. And that includes some of the guys who are going to play on a rotational basis, like Anthony Chickillo and maybe Keon Adams, if he can make the roster this year. You've got to have the right expectations to understand whether he's going to have the type of year that we both think he can have. And I don't think that expectation should be, he needs to have 15 sacks, otherwise he stinks, because that's unrealistic and quite frankly ignores reality.
Well, and that's the only other thing with all things not being equal that you can't put into statistics. You can't necessarily say, well, you know what, if Dupree plays another 167 snaps and equals Justin Houston, he'll equal the production. Maybe, maybe not. That's the only thing that really changes there. And Ryan Kerrigan, and we said it here, one of the 25 guys playing at least 400 snaps, dropping into coverage 5% of their snaps. One guy, double digits. One guy. That's the whole list. I had a top 25, but this is literally the NFL. It's the entire NFL. One guy. You want to round it up? Give Justin Houston 10 sacks instead of 9.5. Great. You got 2 in the entire NFL. 32 teams, however many players on each roster, 11 guys on a side. 2 that fit into the sack leader category. It doesn't quite translate. Now, Houston may be more skilled of a pass rusher than Bud Dupree. Maybe that's why Dupree's asked to drop into coverage more often than not. The one image I always have of Bud Dupree that I won't forget. There's 2, actually. There's one with him chasing Tyrod Taylor, missing him in the snow, and then chasing him down again and getting the sack. High motor guy. TJ Watt, no less of a high motor guy. The other one is taking Matt Moore's head completely off of his shoulders and the postseason 2 years ago in that wild card game. Dupree is certainly a guy that's talented. I think I don't know. I'm done with this guy's a bust. This guy's no good. You look at Watt. I think Watt just gets the pass because one, his name is the same as JJ's. He's his brother, and the second one being he was a rookie. So beyond that, these two are almost twins as far as the way they're asked to play and the way they do play. And either one of them, I think, could have less sacks next year. They could have more sacks next year. Vince Williams was another sack leader. I think he had 8 for the season, which is something that you don't really think of at all.
Yeah.
He was up there too. So I want everyone to enjoy their Memorial Day weekend, hopefully here. Brian, you got any big plans?
I get to I got a brother graduating. Or not brother, a nephew graduating from high school. But he's a Browns fan, so the heck with him.
Man, you're just as cursed as I am. You have Bengals fans in your family, right? That was your brother, wasn't it?
My brother and his youngest son are both Bengals fans. Apparently, the water in Columbus, Ohio, has something wrong with it. The rest of them, my brother's wife is a Browns fan, and so the other 2 sons went to that dark side. But they're basically all on the dark side over there. So at least they're Buckeyes. So there's that.
we have that. I know that upsets some people because we have some Nittany Lion and Panther and Mountaineer fans out there too. We love all of you too. You know what? I don't get too hung up on college football. I got my one team, but I kind of follow everybody that's in my region here, and they play in different conferences and seldom play each other, with the exception of Penn State playing Ohio State. So there's only one that I won't. There's a body of land that Ohio didn't want that's directly to the northwest of the state, and that's where we tend to ignore things. But college football in Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, pretty much I keep my and all that. Even get down into Kentucky. We have a Kentucky guy on the staff too, so Ryan. So, but yeah, you know what? Hopefully the weather will hold up. We'll get to cook some things on the grill. Can't open the pool. Wasn't warm enough yet, but just in saying all that, it's kind of a programming note. We gave you a little bit of an extra long special bonus show here today. We may or may not be back early in the week right after the holiday, but we'll definitely hit you at the end of the weekend as we all recover from stuffing our mouths with food and, in my case, adult beverages.
Yeah, it'll be great. And just a quick shout out to the guys who are following us on YouTube. The subscriptions keep going up. That's fantastic. You know, tell your Steelers friends to listen and subscribe, and give us follows out on the Twitterverse and whatnot. Hopefully, keep the commentary rolling. It's great to engage with you guys.
Yeah, we don't mention it very often, and I don't want to like plug all of our stuff, but if you're listening to this and you're not aware, we have a website where we have a tremendous staff of writers who you don't get to hear their voice here, but you could get their voice in written format over at steelcityunderground.com, and we're all over social media, so you can keep up with all the updates, Facebook, Twitter. We do some fun things on Instagram here or there too, and in fact, YouTube. We love everybody on YouTube. We love everyone on iTunes and stuff too. But the YouTube folks have been great as of late, and so much so that maybe a few of these other formats may just disappear. SoundCloud, although that almost did on its own. So, and we're still working our way into other stuff. We're also on iHeartRadio. We were the only Steelers podcast there for quite some time. I think a few others have leaked on, and we're working on a few other exciting what do you want to say, ventures here leading up to training camp. So, till next time, his name's Chewy. My name. That was a Sand People one. That was not good. That was the Sand People. Man. Yeah. Run far, far away from that, folks. His name's actually Brian. You could tell. My name's Joe. Till next time, be safe, be good. We'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.